welcome to Money Matters TV. My name is Dave Emery. I'm a certified financial planner with Planning Capital Management Company. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce Doug Hepburn. Before we bring him on, I'd like to read a disclosure statement. Doug Hepburn is an investment advisor representative offering securities and investment advisory services through Cetera Advisors, LLC, member FINRA, SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other entity. So thank you. I'd like to welcome Doug Hepburn of Hepburn Financial Advisors to the show. Good to see you, Doug. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing real well. So let's kind of kick things off. So what are you kind of hearing from some of your clients these days? What's new?
Well, there's a lot that's been going on, as you can imagine, between pending legislation in Congress right now, people and trying to get the infrastructure bill, as it's called, as the Build Back Better bill, as well as budget reconciliation done, and the total started out at about 3.5 trillion. Now I think we've been told that it's down to 1.7 trillion. But I think we're all kind of curious to see where that's going to go, because you can't do that kind of spending without raising taxes.
Yeah, right. So you're absolutely right. That's something I'm hearing from my clients too. The whole government spending, and I recently saw was going through some old presentations, and it kind of dawned on me. In 2019, the federal budget was about $4.4 trillion. And I was just kind of looking through like the stimulus bills that President Trump signed while he was in office. Of course, I obviously right off the top of my head remember the 2.2 trillion, the CARES package, but there's other spending around that too. And it came up between all the money that President Trump through his administration signed into law came to about 3.8 trillion. Yeah, so you have 3.8 trillion, and you keep in mind the federal budget is like 4.4 trillion. It's like, boy, that's a lot of money. And then President Biden came in, and the first thing he did was another stimulus package, current relief package, was like 1.9 trillion. It's like, boy, I mean, where is it going to end?
Yeah, you're not alone. A lot of people are saying the same thing. I mean, it's hard to believe that back in the financial crisis of 2008, it was unheard of to do a rescue package of $1 trillion, but we did.
You're right.
Now it's become commonplace.
Yeah. I mean,
people wonder when we're going to stop printing money.
Exactly. I mean, and then President Biden did the 1.9, like you said. They got the 1 trillion infrastructure, and then the Build Back Better, which was 3.5 trillion. Which who knows where both of those bills are going to end up? But it's, one of the questions I get asked is, what's going to happen? I mean, and one of the things that I kind of point back to is the federal, the gross domestic product of this country is like, I think it's like, what is it? I wrote it down here. It's like about $23 trillion. So you do have an economy that, is bigger than that, but it's just like, to me, it's, you got to pause a little bit around that. So.
Exactly. Well, it raises a number of thorny issues. One is, when you have government spending like that, it has a tendency to crowd out other investment. Not only that, but in order to maintain some sort of semblance over the budget, you got to raise taxes. You can't just go spending money without the revenue.
Right.
And so they're talking about different taxes. One, taxes on cryptocurrencies, increasing the exposure, the net investment income tax, and Medicare taxes. I mean, it's not going to affect everybody, mostly people in the highest income brackets. But, back when the income tax was first instituted, I think back in 1911, there was only a handful of people, about 100 people or less, that were subject to it. Now everybody's subject to it.
Right.
And to think that, Congress was even talking about taxing unrealized gains.
Right. I don't even know how they would do that. I mean, because are they going to give it back to you when you have unrealized losses when it goes down in value? I mean, I don't know how that works.
Exactly. Well, it's taxing future earnings.
Mm-hmm.
If we can't get your money today, we'll get what we expect you to earn tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a bit complicated. Fortunately, I think that's been dashed, but that would have changed
Mm-hmm.
the investment industry significantly, because they were talking about taxing exchange traded funds, which
Mm-hmm.
developed because of the inefficiencies in mutual funds.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be just another thing to upend the apple cart, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, the whole taxes. I mean, I guess as of right now, nobody knows where it's going to end up. I mean, it's
Or
I
even if
guess
it's going to get passed.
exactly. And I guess the point I was going to make is, it's good to know, be aware of what's out there, but you
Right.
really, I mean, I'm advising clients that live in the here and now. Right now, we don't.
Exactly.
Right now, we know what the tax laws are. If they're going to change, then more than likely there'll be some notice on changes. Like I personally don't think that they're. I don't know. I'd like to hear your thoughts. As have you ever seen them go back retroactively tax people?
Well, it has happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
It's not very popular.
Right.
Generally, they'll establish a date in legislation when the
Mm-hmm.
concept was first brought out.
Right.
So everything past a certain date is subject to tax. I mean, that's specifically with private activity municipal bonds.
Right.
If you go and fund a new stadium with a municipal bond after X date, then it's going to be subject to tax.
Yeah.
And not have tax preference items
Right.
in the alternative minimum tax. So it has happened, but it doesn't happen very often because obviously politicians want votes, and that's
Right.
kind of an unpopular thing to do.
Yeah.
Change the rules of the game after the game started.
Yeah. So, but we'll see where all this ends up.
Yeah. Fortunately, a lot of the estate tax changes that they were talking about have sort of been pulled out of that bill because they were very unpopular. And so, but in the meantime, a lot of people were, as you said, not planning for here and now, but trying to plan for the future, and did all this planning, and now it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's a great lead in. I guess I should have said at the beginning of the show, we have our guest is actually an estate planning, estate attorney. So that's a good lead in. We'll learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
A little bit. So you ready to have a question from the audience?
Absolutely.
All right. So Rob Wheaton of Ardmore asks, what are your thoughts on inflation? Yeah, that's another topic that I hear regularly from clients.
From Ardmore, a wonderful town. I love it dearly. Close to my heart. Yeah. Inflation in a nutshell is too much money chasing too few goods.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the one hand, we've got the Federal Reserve and the federal government printing all this money. And on the other hand, we've got supply chains that have been disrupted, and we can't get goods into the ports. I think the last time I saw was around 75 ships are waiting offshore of Los Angeles and Long Beach, California, waiting to get in and offload stuff. Even when they get in there and they offload all the containers, they don't have the truckers to be able to move it out. So my thoughts on inflation, I think it's probably going to be here for a little while. So it makes sense to prepare for it, and do that through exposure to commodities, real assets, hard assets. But again, only for a small portion of your portfolio. You're not going to put everything on 28 black.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the other question I get also is, do you think it's rampant like the 70s, inflation? And I don't see that, but I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, when you look at the 1970s, that's what we call hyperinflation. And I know this sounds so a couple of things. First off, inflation is like heart disease or high blood pressure. It's a silent killer. You typically don't see it, but when you look back in history and see that people were able to mail a letter for 1 cent, and now it's what, 49, 50 cents?
Yeah.
That jack up in prices over time really hurts. I don't think we're going to see the kind of hyperinflation we saw in the 70s and early 80s. I certainly hope not. But a little bit of inflation is much better than the alternative, which is deflation.
Right. Good
when
point.
Prices are constantly going down and people are waiting,
Yeah.
waiting till next week to buy that hamburger because it might be cheaper.
That's right. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. So, a little bit of inflation is not bad. The Fed's targeted 2% since forever. Yeah. And we've been under that for the past several years. I think we're probably going to see inflation higher than that as we have for the past 6 months or a year. And that's probably going to continue. Most economists that I hear from suggest that we're going to see some moderation. The real question is whether or not the price increases we've seen are going to stick.
Right. Makes sense. Well, time will tell. Well, great answer to that, extended answer to that question. So this is where you can send your questions to Money Matters.
You can have your questions answered on Money Matters. Please go to our website, money-matterstv.com. On our homepage, click on the banner on the right that says, Send us your questions. While you're on our website, you can find information about our host and guests, as well as show notes and links about this show and past shows. Money Matters is also available as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can listen to Money Matters while you're on the go. That website address, again, is money, MONEY, -matters, MATTERS, TV.com.
Well, welcome back to Money Matters. I'd like to now introduce our guest. Our guest's name is Glenn Henkel, and Glenn's with the law firm of Kulzer Di Padova. Nice to see you, Glenn.
Yeah, nice to see you too, Dave.
Well, good. Well, welcome. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on. It's great to see you guys. Interesting hearing you talk a little bit about taxes, but I'm primarily an estate and tax lawyer. Been practicing for more than 35 years. Talked to a lot of people about their wills, their trusts, and their taxes generally. And happy to join you and spend some time chatting about what people can do and what people need to know.
That sounds great. Appreciate you coming on the show. So tell me a little bit. So what is estate planning? Maybe you can kind of explain a little bit of that for our viewers.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, what exactly is estate planning is something that most people should know. I mean, what is it? Well, it's simply getting a plan in place to get your stuff, your assets, your things to your heirs, the people you care about, in a smooth and efficient way. Having a plan is going to limit some of the confusion that might come up. And if you can limit some of the confusion, you're going to limit some of the administrative costs, limit some of the attorney's fees and some of the taxes that are going to eat away at what you worked hard to earn. So, big picture, estate planning is just getting your stuff to your heirs with the least amount of aggravation, the least amount of stress. Everybody should have an estate plan, whether you have hundreds of millions of dollars or, you have to worry about who's going to take your cat when you pass away. So, that's generally, what planning is about.
Yeah, it's basically it's avoiding some problems up the road. I've definitely seen it where people have done no estate planning and they have their heirs are left with a mess. So it's being prudent and basically passing along your
Boy, Glenn, you got me nervous now. I have to include my cats in my will.
Well, you can. I understand you're babysitting cats today, so
yes, that's right. I'm the guardian for 2 cats. It's interesting. When we do planning for clients all the time, we ask them, do you have copies of your legal documents? Because obviously the will is your basic will, durable power of attorney, and medical power of attorney are kind of basic documents. But a lot of people die intestate. I happen to be down in, of all places, Key West not long ago. I went to the Ernest Hemingway house. And apparently that house was originally built by Asa Forsyth Tipp. And when he died intestate. And the house sat vacant for 40 years. Can you explain what intestacy is all about?
Sure. What happens when someone dies without a will is the state is going to decide. The state you reside in is going to decide who's going to get your stuff. Now, normally it's going to go to the closest kin. There's been a lot of press about the problems with Prince's estate. Prince died and never did a will. You would think that somebody with all that notoriety, all those advisors, would have sat him down and said, look, even if you change it tomorrow, let's get some basic plan as to what you want. But every state has an intestacy rule that's going to determine who's going to get your stuff when you pass away. In some states, the spouse will get the vast majority of the wealth, but not all the states. Sometimes it'll be divided among your heirs. In the event, generally, that you have no descendants of your grandparent, it can even pass over to the state that you reside in. So, it's important for people to simply do a will that's going to avoid having that intestate statute kick in.
So that intestate statute, so kind of to piggyback off of that, does it matter? Like, let's say that I live in Pennsylvania, I don't have a will, and I die in Alaska. What laws are governed? I mean, does it matter? Is it where you pass, or is it where your residents are?
Yeah, that's a great question too. It's going to be totally dependent upon where you reside, and residence is always important. There's a concept in the law called domicile. You can only have one domicile, one legal residence. Some people have houses in Pennsylvania, New Jersey at the shore, and then they have a house in Florida. Well, there's only one of those places that's going to be your principal domicile. And one of the things that's important is to avoid confusion as to what your domicile is, to make it very clear, because that's the law that's going to apply for the administration of your state and how everything's going to work out.
So domicile. So how do you determine that? I'm just thinking, in this whole era of COVID, and people, maybe taking up a couple of different residencies and kind of being a little nomadic. Is there some cut and dry, rules on what constitutes domicile?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is no cut and dry test for domicile. Domicile requires two things. It requires, number one, that you have a residence there. It doesn't have to be owned property. You could even have an apartment that you lease, but you have to have a residence, a place that you could call home if you wanted to. And number two, it's where you intend to be your home. And one of the difficulties in the estate context is, hey, you're not here to tell us. You're not to tell us what your intent is. It's quite frequently now with people who say that they live in Florida, right? They want to assume that they're not going to pay Pennsylvania or New Jersey or New York taxes. So they're going to go down and they're going to buy a condo in Florida. But, if they spend all their time in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, that's not going to make them a resident for those purposes.
Right.
You really have to take some more steps.
Right. And the states actually are cracking down on that a lot. I mean, just from, having been in public accounting, although I no longer practice, I know one of the things we recommended to clients is that they spend 181 days in their new state, change their driver's license, get registered to vote in your new state. Yeah. And do all those things and file your tax returns if there's a tax in that state. Because you have, it's as you said, it's not a bright line test. There are many things that you need to do to establish your domicile. And even now, states are saying, well, if your doctor's not in the state where you domiciled and it's in your previous state, you haven't moved.
Right.
All those northern states want their tax money.
Yeah, could even be a little bit harder. I mean, a lot of states like New Jersey and New York, they say you have to abandon your prior residence, right? So if you have a home that you lived and raised your kids and have been going to, your churches of worship or whatever, if you continue to own that home, even though you buy a little condo down in Florida, that doesn't necessarily mean that you've moved for tax purposes. You got to do something that shows, hey, life is going to be different after than before.
Right. I guess that's because they want the transfer tax on the sale of the property and any gains that might be taxed in that state.
Yeah. If you sell your home, you're always going to pay tax. People think that
exactly.
Like in some states they have what they call an exit tax. It's really not a tax. It's just withholding. They take a little bit of the proceeds to make sure you file a tax return as a non-resident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what can you do to tell people about how to get started on estate planning? You got any thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, when people do their estate planning, there's several documents that they're going to want to put together. Oftentimes, people are going to want to put together 2 documents while they're living: a power of attorney, where they name somebody as their agent to deal with financial matters, an advance directive for healthcare where they name somebody as their spokesperson for medical decisions. Those are two very important documents that last while you're living. And then do the will as well. So if someone wants to get started, usually the idea is to get organized, make lists of what your assets are, your investment accounts, or IRAs, retirement funds, brokerage accounts, cash accounts, your Monets, your real estate interests. If you're fortunate enough to have other investments, you want to kind of get organized, number one. And then number two, start thinking about who your heirs are, who you would want to get your assets, and who you think is going to be responsible enough to get things done. Who can collect your assets, pay your bills, make sure that things stay properly invested, liquidate things prudently, and then make distribution in orderly fashion.
Makes sense. A lot of good stuff there. So it sounds like it's I guess it can be complicated, but it sounds like just going through that it can definitely help to reduce the complexity of things.
One of the things that confuses a lot of people, making it very complicated, is people think, okay, if I do a will, that's going to take care of it. I'll do a will and I say I want everything to go to Doug. But unfortunately, or fortunately, as it might be, if I hold an asset as joint tenants with rights of survivorship with, if I hold...
Sorry about that.
Yeah. If I hold an asset as joint tenants with rights of survivorship with Dave, then it's not going to go to Doug. It's going to go to Dave because he is this joint tenant, and that's
Really?
number one.
I was hoping I would get that.
Yeah. And rule number two is that in some circumstances, assets pass by contract beneficiary designation.
Right.
Take an IRA, a life insurance benefit. If you have a named beneficiary in account, that's going to be rule number two. And then rule number three is going to be the will, where the assets are going to go on the third alternative.
Right. It's I'm glad you mentioned that, Glenn, because a lot of times when I talk to people, just casually in conversation, not necessarily clients, and I mention to them estate planning, they think, I don't have enough money to make that worth it. But the reality is, going through the process is kind of cleaning up the mess before it's too late, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100%.
And just making sure there are no Donnybrooks, with like me and Dave fighting over the assets and property title and why it's not coordinated with the will. Because you told me I was going to get that, Glenn.
That's right. Yeah.
Our practice, unfortunately, involves people that are litigating, siblings. They don't get along with their sibling, and they want to, make sure that they get their pound of flesh. Mom always loved you better, so I'm going to take you to court and fight over that Donnybrook.
I hate to laugh, but it's not uncommon, and I understand that completely. As the executor for my father's estate, fortunately, everything we went through was pretty simple. But I can see how, and I've heard stories of people getting their nose out of joint because as soon as there's money on the table, the knives come out. Yeah,
one of the things I was always kind of intrigued by was that I met with many clients, and they always say, my kids will not fight. I can guarantee you my kids won't fight. It's 3 minutes after the funeral that they're in the office, screaming. So,
and there is a tooth fairy too, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So when you go through probate, is that a big deal for people? When I guess what is probate? We only have we don't have a lot of time left, but probate, I get that question. What's involved with that?
Yeah, probate is simply the state law system that defines how assets go from a decedent to a beneficiary. So if assets don't pass by joint ownership, or they don't pass because of contract beneficiary designation, and they are going to pass because they were left in your individual name, state law is going to define how it goes from the decedent's name to the beneficiary, and that's probate. And probate varies state by state. Up here in the Northeast, a lot of our states are very easy with probate. Some states, very popular states, Florida, Texas, California, it's popular for people to use what's known as a revocable or living trust. And they do that primarily to avoid that probate system. The simple process is that in some states, they want to make sure that everything gets from A to B rather than let it be a family matter. And it means you have to ask a judge for permission to do things. And when you ask a judge for permission, you're going to hire a lawyer to go to the judge. And if you're going to hire a lawyer, it's just going to add much more complicated expense. So many families will simply say, look, I want to avoid probate. So I'll use this revocable or living trust.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I was going to ask you that. I know there was a craze a few years back where people were saying, "Oh, get a living trust," implying that it might save money on estate taxes, but that's not the case, is it?
Yeah, no, you have to give away assets to save estate taxes, and that's a whole nother
ball of
show,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but simply stated, if you do a revocable trust and you can revoke it, it doesn't save any taxes at all. It simply minimizes some of the administrative delays you might have.
And gives you a little more control. It allows you to decide stuff before you die, right?
Absolutely.
As opposed to leaving it in the hands of the courts.
Yeah, and if you do a living trust, it becomes what they call a will substitute. It's going to carry forth what you would have normally said in your will. I want Blackacre to go to Doug, and I want Donnybrook to go to Dave. It's a very simple process.
Yeah, you can have Donnybrook, Dave.
Yeah, okay, that sounds.
I'll take Blackacre.
There you go.
And I guess the final thing on that is, with a living trust, there's also privacy protection too. It doesn't end up getting filed with the county clerk's office, right?
That's right. That's one of the benefits. Another thing is that sometimes when people have diminishing capacity, it's nice to have things in a revocable trust, because if things are in the trust and you're starting to get a little bit elderly and not managing things, it gives an opportunity for somebody to help you through that process.
That's
fantastic.
That sounds great. That's great advice. So, any closing thoughts? One last tip you want to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, where you live is going to determine whether there are taxes that are going to be due. One thing that's very important now is to think about income taxes that might be imposed on retirement funds, and that's going to work. Those rules were just changed last year. Some states, like Pennsylvania, still have inheritance taxes. The federal estate tax, as Doug was saying earlier, there's been a lot of talk about reducing the amount of the exclusion. Right now, it only applies if you have more than $11 million. So, it's not going to apply to very many people. In 2026, it is set to be cut in half to a lower number. But, for people that are subject to the estate tax, the federal estate tax, there's a lot of planning that can and should be done.
Well, great. Well, we really appreciate you, all the advice and the conversation here with you, Glenn. And we could have a whole nother show talking more about the whole estate planning concept. So next week's guest is David Jensen. He's the CEO of Sale Fusion. So make sure to tune in for that. And remember, money matters. Your money matters. Thank you.